All right, heading back home here now and turning to the way that we parent here in Michigan and just how much freedom we give our kids. Two state senators, a Republican and a Democrat, have teamed up to introduce bills here that would make it easier for parents to give their kids more independence without Child Protective Services considering it negligence. It's what they call common sense parenting that really pulls away the burden from the state. Senator Jeff Irwin and Senator Ed McBroom, anytime that I read an op-ed when it says, what does a Republican dairy farmer and a progressive Democrat from Ann Arbor have in common, I have to stop. And you're talking really about parenting and the parameters around parenting. So let me start with you first, Senator Irwin. What was the idea of joining forces together to talk about what some of the regulations are against essentially the freedom of parenting?
Yeah, absolutely. I always enjoy working with Senator McBroom for a lot of reasons. And one of them is that when we can agree on a common sense item, we agree strenuously. And so I don't want to speak for him, but what brought me to the table on this is that I think that we can do better for kids, we can do better for parents, and we can do better for the child welfare system if we take some of these cases where CPS is having to intervene when kids are just doing normal independent activities and get those out of the system. It's going to be better for kids, better for parents, and better for our regulators at CPS.
Senator McBroom, let me ask you this. So what you are both proposing is Michigan's Reasonable Childhood Independence Law. What do we have on the books now that's not being addressed that you think that this new package of bills could?
Well, it's not so much that it's not on the books. It's that as time has elapsed and our standards of what's negligent and what would be considered maybe even abusive have fallen into, is common sense really there anymore? And so somebody can look at our current standards and now interpret them and say, well, letting your kid go to a home alone after school for a couple of hours, that might be neglectful, that might be abusive. Whereas 30 or 40 years ago, nobody would have thought that. But as times have changed, as attitudes and perceptions have changed, there are certainly some people, either the regulators themselves from the state or, people who care but live next door, suddenly interpret these differently. So we're needing to update these and really clarify what these standards mean, and that common sense and reasonability need to be taken into account by the regulators and eventually even the courts if necessary.
So, Senator Irwin, it really puts back on the parents' judgment and what they think of when a child can stay home alone or even walk to school by themselves. You actually had a situation talking about your kids walking to school. Can you explain that?
Yeah, look, as schools have started to develop more and more safety rules, some schools have develop rules that make it very, very difficult for kids to walk home from school, even if they live very, very close to the school. And I encountered that in my school district. And I think it's just another example of the change in culture that Senator McBroom was talking about. And I think that what him and I are trying to do is we're trying to say that, yes, we all care deeply about child welfare. We need to make sure kids are safe in school and elsewhere. But let's make sure that these situations where kids are engaging in age-appropriate, independent activities aren't the situations that bring in child welfare or child protective services. Kids really need to have that independence to be able to grow. Their own agency, their mental health is supported, and their ability to be successful as adults is supported when they get independence and they're allowed to do more activities on their own.
Senator McBroom, let me ask you in terms of, you kind of harken back to your own childhood where you had that freedom. Do we have anything right now law-wise where a child, they have to be a certain age to be home alone, or is Michigan one of those states that we don't have that measurement?
As far as I've been able to tell, we don't currently have a minimum age, and that's perhaps something that maybe can be thought about later on. Right now, we're trying to dial back some of the over-aggressiveness that comes either from the state or from neighbors. And you might even look at what a lot of schools are doing right now, where they won't allow a child to get off the school bus unless a parent is there. And that's not always practical for families. Emergencies happen, people have to go places. And this changing attitude in our schools, so afraid of being sued, the school bus companies so afraid of being sued, we have to address that and give parents and children this ability to work for reasonable standards.
Senator Irwin, so this Michigan would be joining several other states who have similar laws on the books. Explain how it would work and what we would be joining in terms of, I think it's, what are some of the other states? Connecticut?
Yeah, absolutely. So as more and more states are seeing their child protective services workers spend time on little minor issues where clearly kids are just acting independently, more and more states have been adopting laws like the one that Senator McBroom and I are offering and proposing, which is just simply to stipulate that these kinds of independent activities that are age appropriate are not child abuse. And let's make sure that our folks at Child Protective Services have that direction. And let's make sure that folks out in the public hear that as well, because when folks are concerned about child welfare, they should reach out and make a call. But they also need to know that a kid, going to the park on their own to play basketball isn't a situation for Child Protective Services. And in fact, kids do need that independence to be able to grow.
Senator McBroom, what's been maybe some of the pushback that you've received since introducing the bills and the op-ed that came out in the Free Press this weekend?
Well, I've received, I think, zero pushback, except from some people who just are grousing that, well, isn't it a shame that we need to do something like this? But otherwise, it's been very widely well received across all different quarters. What
about you, Senator Irwin? What has the reaction been?
The same. I think there are folks out there who understand that we need a culture change in the space. And I think more and more people are coming around to the idea, and actually some research is coming out along these lines, showing that when kids are not given those opportunities to be independent and to grow and to learn, that can really impact their independence future in their life, but it also impacts their mental health.
Really interesting to piggyback on what Senator Irwin had to say. There is a new study out just this week from 3 professors of psychology and neuroscience that say the lack of independent activity and play actually does coincide with this rise in mental health disorders among young people that we're seeing right now. The lack of independence does not let kids learn from their peers or build resilience or build confidence. It's definitely a conversation to have with your fellow parents and conversations actually with your kids. There could be movement on these bills in the new year.